The Italians just continue their trend to make amazing superbikes, and the newest entry in the market is the 2019 Aprilia RSV4 1100 factory. But everyone wants to know how that compares to the other 1100cc V4 Italian superbike, the Panigale V4S. On paper, they're so closely matched in all respects, but we're going to do a little deep dive into how they differ. In this first part, we're going to focus on what we glean from dyno testing. Now, dyno testing is not as glamorous or as fun or as exciting as watching bikes, slide into corners and do wheelies. But we'll get to that in part 2 and part 3 when we test these bikes on the racetrack and on the street. But for now, just bear with me. I'm going to try to cover a lot of technical information for those inclined in this, who are interested in this field. So we visited our friends at RC Cycles in Hayward, California. They were kind enough to let us use their dynamometer. It's a Dynojet inertial dyno, which is perfect for use in these kind of single gear sweep tests. And more importantly, they have a proper enclosed dyno cell with a ridiculously powerful air circulation system, which refreshes the air in the room several times per minute. This prevents exhaust gas contamination issues, which usually occur in other dyno shops, where the first bike kicks out enough, it pollutes the air full of exhaust, and exhaust is inert, and it replaces the oxygen in the air. So when the second bike dynos, it's basically oxygen depleted and makes less power. So we didn't want to run into that problem, so we went to do it right, and we came to RC Cycles. So the first bike on the dyno is our brand new 2019 Aprilia RSV4 1100 factory. It is rated at a ridiculous 217 horsepower. And my God, does it really make what it claims. Now, all the numbers we're going to be giving are at the wheel numbers. So they're always lower than the crank numbers that the manufacturers market. So, if you're familiar with dynos, you know this, but if you don't, expect wheel numbers to be slightly lower than crank numbers due to driveline loss. So, we in this test we also made sure that both bikes were running on the same fuel, 91 octane Chevron fuel, which is the highest octane we can get here in California. Both bikes were dynoed within 2 hours of each other. In each case, we did several runs in 4th gear, 5th gear, and 6th gear. We'll get to that later in the video and explain which runs we use for comparison. Now I'll shut up for a little bit and you can listen to how good this bike sounds on the dyno without the volume turned down. Jesus, nearly 208 wheel horsepower. That is not something you see every day. This is by far the most powerful motorcycle I've ever tested on the dyno. Next up is, of course, the 2018 Ducati Panigale V4S. This was the reigning horsepower king until today, and you've seen these bikes dyno plenty of times on YouTube before, so I'm not going to drag this out too long. But I'm also going to give you the opportunity to listen to this thing without me blabbing away. Here it goes. Comparing the two 6-gear pulls, we can see the Ducati makes more power through the low end and the mid-range. In the upper mid-range, they're closely matched, but in the very top end, the Aprilia keeps building power linearly, while the Ducati kind of flattens out and rolls off. On the road, you can feel the extra torque that Ducati has in the low end and mid-range. It's just shockingly punchy and dramatic in the way it builds speed. It's just hard to wrap your head around what an effective speed tool it is. The Aprilia takes a different approach. The torque curve is more linear and it builds speed very smoothly. The steady climb towards peak torque at 11,000 RPM means that it gathers speed in a very drama-free and deceptive manner. Whereas the Ducati kind of gives you a shock and awe treatment whenever you whack open the throttle, the Aprilia's rate of acceleration it climbs in a way that's hard to understand. It doesn't feel as fast, but when you look down at the speedometer, you are clearly going way faster than you think you are. I can see this trait being a very good a good characteristic on the track, where you're interested in just speed, not necessarily drama. As a full-time professional engine tuner of 20 years, I'm really impressed with how what Aprilia did with this engine. It's an engineering achievement. The fact it can make power so smoothly and so much of it, it's very impressive. But as a rider, I'm aware there's a couple shortcomings of it. Number one, to make peak power, you have to basically flirt with rev limiter. And on the road or track, banging against rev limiter, especially the hard rev limiter, the bang, 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 bang rev limiter that the Aprilia has, you don't want to do that. It'll upset the chassis. It'll cause some panic. It could lead to some problems. So it goes without being said that, but I'll say anyway, that the last few horsepower is hard to extract in the real world. Where on the other hand, the Ducati offers nearly 2,000 RPM overrun after peak horsepower is churned out. That means you don't need to flirt with the rev limiter to achieve maximum acceleration. In fact, you'll even be able to feel the power drop off well before the rev limiter even comes into play. And when you do hit the rev limiter, if you do, it's not an aggressive, abrupt cut like it is on the Aprilia. Instead of a fuel cut, it's basically a soft throttle closure. So all you feel is just the engine stopping to make power. It's very not dramatic. This is a great example of when engineers actually listen to the nuanced feedback from test riders. Before we wrap up this first part of this series, there are a few more things worth mentioning. The Aprilia consistently made the same power in 6th gear as it did in 5th gear, as it did in 4th gear. That suggests some pretty clever engine mapping or a really efficient transmission. The Ducati, like most other bikes we've tested, made the most power in 6th gear, a couple less horsepower in 5th gear, and a couple less horsepower in 4th gear. The Ducati also needed slightly more cool down time between runs in order to keep the coolant temps in the desired testing range. Of course, on the road or track, the radiator will see a whole lot more mass airflow through it than it does on a dyno with 2 small fans blowing on it. So I wouldn't read too much into this. It shouldn't have any real-world implications. And lastly, the Ducati is fitted with a stickier tire using Pirelli's new SP3 compound and a taller 60 profile compared to the Aprilia's SP2 compound and conventional 55 profile. So it's possible that the Ducati's softer rear tire is robbing it of a little bit more power. But we can revisit this once both bikes are fitted with the same exact slicks, and we can kind of rule out that variable nicely. So thanks for watching this first part of 3, and we look forward to bringing you more content. If you enjoyed what we brought you this episode, please be sure to like our video and subscribe to our page, and also follow us on Instagram. We look forward to making more cool content for you. Until then, please ride safe and enjoy.